pass things off over to Susan Seaman, our wonderful and amazing and talented Summit Chair and Mayor of Eureka. Take it away, Susan.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys all for being here today. We have been looking forward to our second annual Redwood Coast Region Economic Development Summit for a long time. It was a mouthful of a name. I like to think that it's the same committee that picked the airport name for Arcata. I am Susan Seaman. I am the program director at Arcata Economic Development Corporation and the mayor of Eureka. And we've been putting together economic development summits for Humboldt County for several years, and just last year, for the first time, we're able to pull together this Redwood Coast event. Before I start today, I want to acknowledge that throughout the region, we are all on unceded territory and traditional ancestral homelands of Indigenous nations. Several, so I won't list them all. You probably can put in the chat if you know the names of the nations that where you are, that'd be great. We respect and share our gratitude to Indigenous communities, and we'd like to take this opportunity to thank and honor the original caretakers of land that they continue to cherish and protect, as their elders have instructed the young through generations. So thank you all for being here, and happy fall. This is my favorite time of year. I think it's a lot of people's favorite time of year for so many reasons. I know I'm not alone, and I know that we have the mute on and the cameras off. So just as a way to sort of start feeling like we're part of this conversation together, just let me know, what is your favorite thing about fall? Is it the fresh, crisp air, which I am certainly enjoying this morning? Falling leaves? Are you a big pumpkin spice fan? Just let us know in the chat, and we can kind of get to know each other a little bit, and it'll feel like we're all in the same room together. So as I mentioned, this is our second regional event, and we are so happy to be strengthening our regional ties and learning from each other as we discuss economic development in what is a really pivotal time in our region and our country. Our initial planning for this event last year, we were forced to create a virtual summit for COVID because of safety. This year, after the success from last year, we decided to keep it virtual so that we could encourage participation from the whole region. And I am so thrilled that we have folks from Humboldt, Del Norte, Mendocino, and Lake counties, all as well as a variety of our tribal partners here today. We also understand that it's pretty easy to conflate a virtual conference with every other Zoom meeting that we attend multiple times a day. It's hard to bring the same focus when you're sitting at your desk and the same kind of enthusiasm that you might when you're in a room together, especially when you're physically close to all of the work that I know you're all needing to do, because I've not talked to anybody who isn't just really full of work to do right now. So I really appreciate you taking some time, sort of blocking it off today for this conference. And we really tried to do our part to make this conference as much like a traditional event as possible. There are some rules that we want to abide by, which you've seen, to keep the microphone and camera off so that we can keep things moving smoothly, and we can stay focused on our presenters. But we will have opportunities when you can turn the camera off and when things can be really interactive, and we will let you know when those happen. We have pulled together an incredible group of keynote speakers today. You'll get to meet them all through the day, and it'll help set the stage for our state and regional economic picture, taking into account where we're seeing the most change and the most opportunity. This is really we have tried to create keynote speakers that you would see if you went to a conference in, say, Sacramento or San Diego or Los Angeles. And we're just really thrilled that they're here today. We'll also hear from, we'll end the day with a futurist who's going to help us think about how the decisions we make today are going to affect us in the long-term future. And I think when we're talking about change, it's really important to think about the consequences of not changing, and the consequences of changing, and what does that really mean in the long run. So I'm excited to hear from him. Tomorrow, we've created panel discussions that allow for a broad range of topics to explore. So we'll have panel discussions followed by breakout World Cafe style sessions that are going to allow for a lot of substantive engagement, opportunities to talk to each other, opportunities to really delve into how maybe something that was really cool that was happening in Lake County could be done in Norte County. And so the nice thing about this conference, I think, and one of the reasons I really wanted to see something like this happen, is it's so inspiring to go to other conferences and see how other folks do things. But we are, somewhat unique here. In our region, we have a lot of similar challenges. And sometimes when you go to those bigger conferences, you feel like that's a really cool idea, but I don't know how it would work where we are. And so this is an opportunity for us to learn from these regional communities that really are similar to us. And we really can get some great ideas about how we can try something new from our neighbors who really sort of get our special needs here in the Redwood Coast region. Looking at Eventi earlier, I noticed that you have to scroll past the sponsors and some other things to get down to the program. We also have the program listed in the book part of the program. And I think that there was another section that says program on Eventi that you can click on. So if you're wanting to sort of look ahead, see what some of those breakout sessions are, there are lots of places for you to find it. And if you need any help finding it, please just send us a direct message and we'll make sure you get that information so that you can feel like you're informed through the whole process. Another thing that we have done with this conference that we tried to do to create that feeling of something that we're all doing together, a way to bring us together when we can't all be in the same room, is that we created that a swag bag for the event. It's just like one you would get from a big conference, but I think ours is better. It has goodies from local businesses in the region, including Anita K Chocolates in Norte County, which is a small craft chocolate business. We have coffee from Humboldt Bay Coffee in Humboldt, saffron shortbread from Peace and Plenty Farms in Lake County, and wildflower honey from Carson and Bees in Ukiah. So I think it's a really fun opportunity to show off all of the cool things that are happening throughout the region. It also gives us an opportunity to enjoy some treats while we're watching the conference. So I hope you enjoy them. There are also fun goodies from our sponsors in the bags as well. And they really did a good job thinking about what might be fun to get. So I think these are really fun swag bags. If you didn't get one and you expected to, we'll have them tonight at the networking events, or you could give me an email and I'll see how we can get those to you. In the bag, we also have this program. I'll show you. It is partially a program for the event, and it's partially a showcase of economic development throughout the region. So we have all of the different counties highlighted with stories about what's happening in their communities. So we'll get to hear about county off-highway vehicle facilities plan and in Norte County. What else is going on? In Humboldt, we could read about Cal Forest WRX, which I think we'll also have featured in one of our presentations. Let's see, in Lake County, we'll get to hear about the City of Lakeport's Inside Out project. So in Mendocino, we have the Economy Symposium and Learning Festival that you can hear about. So it's just a really great way to let some of our local jurisdictions and our local tribal members talk about projects that they're working on that they're really proud of. And we wanted to share those with everybody. But speaking of the program booklet, it's a huge project. It's one of my favorite things that we put in our bag. And as much as we try to get it right, sometimes we make mistakes. It appears that we duplicated the Mendocino County tribes on the Lake County page when we were doing some editing. So the Lake County tribes were left out. So I would like to offer an apology to the tribes, Lake County, for this oversight. For a more accurate map with representation from all the tribes, please look at the page directly across from the front cover. It's got this full map here with representations from all the tribes. Our goal for this conference is inclusiveness and to learn from each other. And even though mistakes get made, it's especially frustrating when it affects people that we're trying to get to know better. So please accept our sincere apology and know that we will do better next time. So going back to the conference and what to expect today, last year during our conference, we had something we called a virtual expo hall for our sponsors, and they would invite folks to their room to chat about whatever came up. But we noticed that the groups were really active last year. We're having really focused conversations. So we decided this year to change that, call those rooms conversation rooms and have a topic. So when you're going in to talk to one of our sponsors, you know there's going to be something that you're interested in learning more about. So it's not just a host room, it's a conversation that will be led by the host, and it's a really great opportunity for our sponsors to make sure we're able to address a lot of topics, because there's so very many topics we can talk about that are important to them in the limited amount of time we have together. So check out what all of those topics are, see which ones are interesting. We gave you time for lunch, and then you can come back and do the conversation rooms. So you don't have to feel like you're so stressed during the day, you need to step away. You can step away, come back, have some great discussions, and then get excited for the afternoon keynote speakers, which are going to be fabulous. Speaking of our sponsors too, so our sponsors will have those conversation rooms, but I would love to give a shout out to our platinum and gold sponsors, including the College of the Redwoods, Vocality Credit Union, the County of Humboldt, Tri-Counties Bank, and PG&E. You can learn more about them and so many of our other important sponsors on our Eventee page. So please do take a look at them. Every single sponsor was super important, and this truly could not have happened without them. This event also wouldn't happen without the help of our volunteer summit planning team. So let me emphasize, this was a volunteer summit planning team. Thank you to Layla Roberts, who helped pull together our program of speakers. Even though she was juggling a million of her own projects, she never complained. She is a class act, because that was a monumental job, and I'm so appreciative to her. Thank you so much to the rest of our team who helped fill that schedule with programs, promote our region, planned networking events, provided insight and support for many of the last many months. These folks include Sarah Barber from UROC EDC, Stacy Kaikau from EDFC in Mendocino, Susan Dale McCarthy from the city of Arcata, who made our logo, Greg Foster from Redwood Region Economic Development Commission, who is helping to host our networking event tonight, Nicole Laura from Lake County EDC, Katrina Kesson from Greater Ukiah Business and Tourism Alliance, who I believe is hosting the event in Ukiah tonight, Nancy Olson from the Greater Eureka Chamber of Commerce, Paloma Patterson from West Business Development Center, Diana Rios from the County of Humboldt, Laura McAndrew Samuel, who I believe is helping to host the Lake County event tonight, she's from the Lakeport Chamber of Commerce. Terry Swift from the Mendocino Coast Chamber of Commerce, who will be hosting our event in Fort Bragg. Ashley Taylor from the City of Crescent City, who will be hosting our event tonight, and Cindy Vosberg from the Crescent City Chamber of Commerce. We also have our crack support team of Clara Shook and Allie Jones, who've been working together to make sure we're promoted and we're prepared for the technical challenges that arise from programs like this. They are critical to the success of this event, and I'm so grateful that they're there for us. Finally, for our conference, we have networking mixers tonight. So I kind of mentioned them before. This is an opportunity for you to share thoughts about what you learned today with some of your friends from your local area. They'll be held in Crescent City, Eureka, Ukiah, Fort Bragg, and Lakeport. You should have received emails about your local events, but I will ask, if you are a host of one of those events, can you put in the chat the location and time for tonight, just as yet another reminder for folks of when and where to be there. I hope you can all make it to your local event. As many of us have learned, it's those casual conversations and a moment of inspiration. That is where great action starts. So I hope you will be very inspired by the end of the day and have some great conversations tonight, and also enjoy some food and drink. Last year, after we started planning this conference, it was after we started planning the regional conference, we were informed about the Community Economic Resilience Fund, or SERF. Ish Herrera was one of our keynote speakers, and he introduced the program to us. I'm happy to say that we were able to pull together a regional application called Redwood Coast Rise, and we are waiting confirmation for the $5 million planning grant. The pandemic was a massive hurdle for businesses and communities to get through. It also created a spotlight on historic weaknesses in our economy, especially in the areas of equity and soft infrastructure, all under the umbrella of climate change and the impacts it has on us. These are all things we're exploring in this summit, and all things that we're mandated to explore for the SERF planning. Marianne Petrello from West Business Development Center was a key convener in the region as we were learning about the program, and her early work was critical to the success of completing the application. Ultimately, AEDC, where I work, a regional economic development lender, stepped up to become the fiscal sponsor. The Center for Rural Policy, California Center for Rural Policy at Cal Poly, is filling the role as the convener, and North Coast Opportunities in Mendocino will fill the role for outreach and engagement. Before we sent in our application, we had 47 signed letters of participation from folks who are agreeing to serve on the oversight committee, which is called the High Road Transition Collaborative. That group of participants is not set in stone. However, we're going to continue to grow the HRTC, as well as reach out for many other ways for folks to participate. So please keep your eyes open for that. The grant that we applied for is not competitive, so we expect to be successful. Key partners are continuing to meet even now to discuss strategies. So when we finally do receive word about it, we will be ready to move forward. Once the funds are received, they'll support plans and strategies to diversify local economies and to develop sustainable industries that create high quality, broadly accessible jobs for all. During the planning phase, we are going to identify projects throughout the region that advance globally competitive and sustainable industries with clear employment pathways for underserved and incumbent workers that bolster equity, climate, and health outcomes. The implementation phase is going to come much later in the planning process, and the state will open up about $500 million that we can apply for to help fund those projects. But before we even get there, we have to do a lot of planning. So watch for opportunities to participate, to share your thoughts about what we can do to support a strong, equitable economy, and also watch for the announcement of the award, which hopefully will be coming very soon. So I am a little bit early for Senator McGuire, and I'm wondering if his team is on yet. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of who we're going to be seeing today, and I'll introduce Senator McGuire when he gets here. But we will be first with Senator McGuire, and then after Senator McGuire, we are going to hear from Tara Lynn Gray, who is the director of the California Office of the Small Business Advocate, which is quite looking forward to hearing from her. We're going to hear from Carolyn Batete from Visit California. She's going to really talk about some of the opportunities and the changes in the tourism industry. And that was something that we did not get to explore a whole lot last year. Robert Eiler, who is a professor of economics at Sonoma State University, is very familiar with a lot of issues about economic development in our region, our whole region. So he's going to kind of paint a picture of that for us. And then we'll close out the day with Ken Hammock, who's a futurist working in Humboldt County, and is going to help us sort of think about these long-term planning projects. I am wondering, I'm going to start talking about Senator McGuire. I don't know if I have 10 minutes of things to say about him, except for...
Hey, good morning, Mayor.
Yay! This is all on me. I am always half an hour is a long time to talk, right? And I didn't want to get, certainly didn't want to move into your space. So what I am going to do now then is introduce you. So I am going to say, I'm happy to introduce our first keynote speaker, who is a shot of adrenaline for us all this morning, Senator Mike McGuire. Senator McGuire was named Senate Majority Leader in 2022, where he remains a fierce advocate for our region. He's a champion for kids in public schools. He's also a dad, and he's a defender of our environment. He has been successful at securing funding for homelessness and affordable housing projects. He even helped secure funding for the Arcata Crabs Ballpark, which was a wonderful surprise to us locally. He is pro-trail and will be participating in the 2022 Trail Summit this weekend in Humboldt, where I'm guessing he'll provide a great Redwood Trail update, but that's just a guess. For those who are interested, that event is going to be from 9 to noon tomorrow at the Sequoia Conference Center. And for the few of you who have not seen him as an auctioneer, he is also a great fundraiser for local efforts, sometimes almost literally bringing down the house with his stomping and clamping and encouraging folks to support a variety of local causes. He is also my friend, even when I give him bad news. I'm just reminding him that. And he's always willing to help. I'm happy he's willing to help us kick off this event. Thank you so much for coming, Senator McGuire.
Madam Mayor, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you so much. And I think we need to give a round of applause for Mayor Seaman and for her incredible work. And that bad news is when she said she decided that she was not going to run. And I just want to say, Susan, you are the best. You have dedicated so much to this county, to the city of Eureka, and we are stronger because of your leadership. Thank you so much. We give a round of applause, please, to Mayor Seaman, and say thank you. And so grateful for your commitment to the North Coast. Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We have one hell of a panel for you here this morning to be able to kick us off today. So hopefully you've been able to get your Ramones coffee and you're ready to go. We're going to be talking about bridging the digital divide here on the North Coast and of course throughout the Golden State. Before we get into our specific panel, I do want to mention an unrelated topic. We've been receiving a lot of phone calls and emails, rightfully so, from concerned Humboldt residents about PG&E and PG&E's recently announced power capacity issues, their potential inability not to meet the electric demand for the city of Fortuna, city of Rio Dell, as well as southern Humboldt County. I think that we can all agree that that is completely unacceptable. And once we found out about this, late last week, we went to work with Assemblymember Jim Wood. And we have since met with all levels, including the CEO of Pacific Gas and Electric. We've met with local leaders in Fortuna and Rio Dell, as well as the county of Humboldt and the Public Utilities Commission here in the state of California. I'd like to let you know that from our meetings, PG&E will now be sitting down with the city of Fortuna, the city of Rio Dell, along with the county of Humboldt, to be able to talk more specifically about their future power demands and associated projects that are potentially in the planning pipeline in the coming 24 to 36 months. We'll then be bringing the county, the cities, the Public Utilities Commission, and PG&E back together with Assemblymember Jim Wood in the coming weeks so that we can get a more concrete plan from Pacific Gas and Electric on how they're going to meet the energy demand for the city of Fortuna, city of Rio Dell, along with Southern Humboldt County. I assure you that we are on top of this. We're going to continue to work this, and I'm grateful for your patience. More to come, and we'll be addressing this here in the coming weeks. Now let's get to the topic at hand, and we are so excited about this panel that we're bringing to you today. We're going to be focusing on bridging the digital divide, and we are grateful that you would take the time to be able to attend this important panel and to be able to attend this fantastic summit, Growing Forward. Thank you so much, the Redwood Coast Economic Development Summit organizers. We have just been told we have over 200 folks who have RSVP'd today. We're grateful that you are joining us. Let's get right into, though, this first panel. The state of California has recently launched the largest public broadband project in the United States of America. This project is going to invest in unserved rural communities and underserved urban centers like never before. We know, especially living here on the North Coast, that our thriving economy, our economy depends on being connected to high-speed internet. And for far too long, too many of us on the North Coast have been on the wrong side of the digital divide. And there are several lessons to be learned from this global pandemic, and we can't let one of the most important lessons go to waste. We must connect California to high-speed internet. And in order to do so, I'm just going to be blunt about it, we can't rely on the incumbent corporations to do so. It's going to take public investment and partnerships at all levels of government to get the damn job done. And this is what this panel is all about: getting the job done and connecting our communities. And here's why the state of California is moving with such urgency. We know that rural parts of California, especially in Northern California, we know that the North State has some of the most unserved communities in the entire West. In fact, 51% of rural households do not have adequate high-speed internet options. And we know that this impacts our kids' education. We know that this impacts our healthcare system. It impacts our business community. It impacts the way we access emergency information in times of a fire or an earthquake or a tsunami. It impacts every part of our life, and it's not acceptable. And that is why the state of California will be moving with speed in the coming months. The Public Utilities Commission estimates about 2.3 million Californians have no broadband access at modern speeds. And we also know that the majority of these 2.3 million Californians, they're either Latino, Black, Native American, or they live in rural California. We have to do better. And that's why the state of California is now investing nearly $7 billion to expand broadband infrastructure and enhance internet access in unserved and underserved communities. So nearly $4 billion will be invested to build out the middle mile, essentially the highway that will serve communities. And speaking of highway, the state of California will be burying literally thousands of miles of conduit and fiber to be able to serve unserved and underserved communities throughout the state. And the state of California will be providing about $3 billion for cities and counties to connect to that middle mile that will be buried on the shoulders of highways, so that they can build out their own local internet system. So we're going to dive deep today, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to dive deep in today's panel discussion. And we have invited 3 of the state's leading experts and one of my favorite humans on the entire face of the earth, Gail Miller, to talk about broadband and digital access. And we're going to be talking about the investments and how you can get involved here in the months and years to come. So first and foremost, we're going to hear from Gail Miller. She is the Chief Deputy Director of the Department of Finance. She's also a member of the esteemed Middle Mile Advisory Committee. She's going to be giving us an overview of the Golden State's commitment to bridging the digital divide. Then we're going to be hearing from Mr. Scott Adams. He's the Deputy Director for Broadband and Digital Literacy for the California Department of Technology. He's going to be talking about broadband for all and how connecting the middle and last miles are all going to work. And then we're going to hear all about the nuts and bolts. Mr. Mark Monroe is with us. He, of course, is Deputy Director for the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative. He's going to be diving deep on all of the data. How are these middle mile projects going to be identified? How do we connect to communities? How are communities going to be funded? By the time you leave, you are going to be connected to exactly what we need to do as the North Coast to be able to ensure that we're going to succeed when it comes to connecting to broadband in the years to come. So let's go. Let's get right into it. Let's give a warm North Coast welcome to Gail Miller. She's going to be kicking us off on the overview of the Middle Mile Project. Gail, we love you. Thank you for your incredible work. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Senator, for that introduction. I sincerely appreciate it, and it's really a joy to be here today. And I have to say, if it weren't for Senator McGuire's tireless work on the digital divide and really educating everyone in Sacramento about what it means to be in the North Coast versus in Sacramento or San Francisco, we wouldn't have a $6.5 billion broadband project. He worked tirelessly, as I'm sure you all know, as he does with everything in the region, to make sure that the state did not lose sight of it. Literally, this is hard in politics. When the deal was about to fall apart, Senator McGuire was in as a pinch hitter, got an entire group together, had Zoom calls for literally 72 hours straight almost, to make sure that we could close the deal and that we would no longer have an excuse to leave folks behind. So it is truly, Senator McGuire, I don't say this lightly, and I honestly don't say this often, but it was you that actually delivered this, not only for this region, but for the entire state. And as you said, this is why we do the work we do, because the truth about the digital divide is that it is now a commodity. Without it, we can't do school, we can't do work, many of us can't do healthcare, and we certainly can't run our businesses. So we understand the obligation. And between the federal money and the state money, we do have over $6.5 billion invested. The good news about the federal money is that all of this money has to be encumbered. So it has to be under contract by 2024. So when you hear from Mark and Scott, who are really some of the best public servants I have ever had the privilege of working with in terms of their ability to manage a project, their ability to understand finances, work with different people, you'll see how you could imagine between now and 2024, you will know exactly where your broadband will be, exactly how resilient it will be, and how you can really begin to envision not having the disruptions that each of you have had to face every single day, because California hasn't yet gotten where it needs to get on the digital divide. So it is indeed historic. There's a couple things just to build on what Senator McGuire is talking about that we're doing within this program. Obviously, it's not just about a single source of broadband, because there's multiple users and greater bandwidth needs. We are making sure that the network we're building is incredibly resilient and not subject to kind of the upcharges and some of the little games of throttling the amount of speed you can get that we've been seeing in the past. 77% of people have more than one user in their home or business. And we know that the average size of households with school-age children are 4.5 people. So that means that you cannot only have access that works for one person in your house, but all the people in your house. And The other thing we know is that the type of access to computing devices also matters for internet, right? So we don't all have a desktop or a laptop. So when we talk about the digital divide, another piece that the senator's been working on is just making sure that we understand that devices are necessary in order to connect to the internet. And we've seen improvements in that. I do think the pandemic, there was a silver lining, certainly helped with getting folks connected, especially for school. But it also, as Senator McGuire said, really highlighted and magnified the disparity in who has what. And then both the federal government continues to really invest. Obviously, you know now what the state's done, but the federal government has the emergency broadband benefit program, and that provides a subsidy. And as it expires, the state of California will really have to make sure that we keep up not only the ability to afford internet, but the ability to really access it and know where to get it. So what that means, and the reason we created a program called this Middle Mile program, which you'll hear a lot about today, is so that the state of California can build and manage an infrastructure and network in order to ensure that this is not subject to the whims of any single telecommunications company, cable company, internet company. But what the North Coast is doing especially well is that regions and communities and counties themselves can participate in delivering internet service. We've seen that with Sonic in your area. We've seen it with Monkey Brains in San Francisco, that it's an incredibly effective way to deliver service, and it's an incredibly affordable way. So not only is the money there to develop this system, but it actually is changing the status quo. And this is perhaps the most significant thing we're doing. We, in the bill that Senator McGuire led, we actually disrupted the industry. And we said, you know what? Everybody needs access to this. This is becoming a public good. So what we did is we created an infrastructure that Mark is running called the Middle Mile Initiative, where we're building that entire resilient network across the 8,000 miles of the state. And then in addition to that, the Public Utilities Commission has $2 billion, let me make sure I got that right, to make sure that $2.7 billion, to make sure that then there will be subsidies to connect folks to the last mile. And the final thing I'll say is, again, from Senator McGuire, is we did technical assistance, and we also did this loan loss reserve program. Both of those are at the Public Utilities Commission. Please, please reach out to me, reach out to the PUC if you're in a community that can take advantage of this, because that's how there will be the resources available where communities can create their own resilient networks. And that's how you can build on, especially the work Sonic's doing, especially the work we're seeing across regions where there are the JPAs being created in order to deliver services. So between now and 2024, you will be very clear on the plan on how you can see yourselves in the maps that that Mark and I think Scott are about to show you. And you'll begin to see how your communities will be involved, and you'll no longer have to, you won't be able to, blame your internet service when you don't want to talk to your mother-in-law or something, but at the same time, you will actually get to do your jobs and go to school and get your healthcare covered. So I really look forward to your questions. I'm really grateful I got to be here. Thank you, Senator, for inviting us. And it's just such a pleasure. And I cannot tell you what a huge difference this region has made. The last thing I'll say when Mark shows you the maps is to be mindful that while we have one project defined in Lake County, you'll see all these projects happening together. We did a pilot project to just make sure we knew how to do pre-construction, that we knew where the conduit fiber was coming from, that we knew how to direct Caltrans. So please, when you look at the map, know that all of these projects really are happening simultaneously in a lot of ways, and that we are all under this huge deadline, which I think is great to hold us accountable for 2024. So with that, Senator, if it's okay with you, I'd love to turn it over to my colleagues, unless there's anything that I did not answer that you were hoping I would cover this morning.
No, it's all good. I want to say thank you so much to Gail Miller. And Gail Miller has been incredibly modest. She actually drove this along with the governor to be able to get this done, and now has been overseeing the program. And we're really grateful for your focus on rural California, Ms. Miller. Thank you so much. And she's going to be sticking around to be able to answer questions, address comments. And that is a good reminder. We're taking your questions, your comments here today live. We're going to encourage you to be able to drop your comments, your questions, your concerns into the chat now. Then we're going to be going through the chat and asking each of these leaders to be able to give responses to your feedback. So as you hear from Gail and Scott and Mark, make sure you drop those questions into the chat. We're going to have an interactive conversation. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're now moving to Scott Adams. Scott Adams is going to really get into the details of the funding. We're grateful that Mr. Adams is here. Mr. Adams brings a really unique perspective to this position. Mr. Adams has worked for both private and now for public side of the broadband discussion. So he's able to bring a private industry focus into America's largest public broadband project, which we're really grateful for. So he's going to be giving us the details on the plan, the funding, and then he's also going to be focusing on tribal governments. That's also been a really significant focus for the state of California, how we can work with both local as well as tribal governments. Mr. Adams, we're grateful you're with us. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Senator McGuire and Ms. Miller. Really appreciate being here. Thank you to all the attendees. I think you said 200 folks. That's absolutely amazing. And as a constituent in the southern part of your district, I always appreciate your leadership, Senator McGuire, and your advocacy on broadband. Understanding that folks have a different way of retaining information, Mark and I have prepared some brief slides that we are going to show. I'm hoping everyone can see these right now. Are these showing up okay?
We are seeing them bright and clear.
Great, fantastic. Well, like you said, Senator McGuire, I'm Scott Adams. I'm the Deputy Director of Broadband and Digital Literacy at the Department of Technology. With my partner, Mark Monroe, who you're going to hear from later, we run the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy and are charged with coordinating all the state's broadband efforts related to Broadband for All to make sure that they're aligned in achieving the objectives that we've been charged with. Like you said, we're going to talk briefly about Broadband for All, then the middle mile, issue a call to action, and we put together some contacts and links for folks to follow up and communicate with us. This slide here is really just going to shape the kind of the flow of my comments, and that's really, as you said, you know, and as Ms. Miller said, that broadband is absolutely essential in today's modern world. We need it for everything from, you know, education to healthcare access to work. And Broadband for All that began with the governor's executive order and was further outlined in the Broadband Action Plan is really designed around 4 critical components that are essential for digital equity. And that's access to reliable, robust broadband, making sure that that is affordable, helping to assist folks adopt that technology, and then helping to provide the skills and training that are needed. The Broadband Action Plan was put together really in just about 4 months during the pandemic and includes 24 specific action items that various state agencies were charged with to help support deployment of broadband and broadband adoption throughout the state. And that includes improving the state's mapping, improving the state's standards, looking at ways to enhance permitting at all levels of government to support broadband deployment, and then leveraging funding sources to support the state's broadband efforts. As Ms. Miller shared at the top of this, in July of 2020, both the legislature and the governor answered a call and addressed the significant needs that were outlined in the Broadband Action Plan for funding to make investments in necessary middle and last mile infrastructure to support the Broadband for All goals. And that was the $6 billion of investments, $3.25 billion, as Ms. Miller said, to go to the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative, which has been further augmented in this year's budget, and then the $2.75 billion to go to the last mile programs that are administered through CPUC. As Ms. Miller said, those are really the last mile grants to go to ISPs, local governments, and other eligible entities to develop last mile solutions, including tribal entities, to develop a technical assistance program and the loan loss reserve. One thing that we did want to note, and we'll definitely speak more about in the Q&A, is that our office is continuing to leverage any available federal funding dollars to support the aims of Broadband for All. And so the Affordable Connectivity Program is, as Ms. Miller said, is the successor to the Emergency Broadband Benefit. For folks who have access to broadband but can't afford it, that provides a very significant subsidy, $30 to residents, and then $75 to individuals living on tribal lands to get home internet service. And then the state is leveraging through the Department of Technology digital equity grants to support and establish a digital equity plan over the next year, which will be done in concert with the PUC, who is leveraging a whole nother pool of federal funding through the NTIA's Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. And together, those will be essentially another layer on top of the Broadband for All cake of resources that the state will go out and get to add to the overall program and support the efforts of local and regional folks here to really get the assistance they need. And I know, Senator McGuire, it's incredibly important. The state's Broadband for All program, tribal entities and their needs are absolutely front and center. So there's a number of ways that the state is engaging with tribal governments to make sure that both the middle mile supports last mile solutions that are being developed in their areas, hosting technical assistance webinars to make sure that federal funding programs that might be out there that could augment the state programs to support tribal areas are made the most use of. And so that really summarizes my comments, and I want to kick it over to Deputy Director Mark Monroe to really dive in deep about the significant middle mile project that he's driving.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mr. Adams. Mr. Monroe, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Take it away and getting in the nuts and bolts.
Good morning. Yeah, I'm Mark Monroe with the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative, or MMBI, as we usually reference it. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the state's MMBI project as a key component of closing the digital divide, as Scott was referencing. We can kind of move on to the next slide here, but as noted, the 2021 Budget Act provided $3.25 billion in federal ARPA funding to CDT to develop a statewide open access middle mile network. The intent is for the network to utilize a combination of new and existing infrastructure to reach unserved and underserved communities throughout the state. For constructed segments, Caltrans will do pre-construction and construction work along the state highway right-of-way. And we also note that the 2022 budget package provided for an additional $550 million in future funding for the MMBI. So the total funding for the MMBI now is up to $3.8 billion. These MMBI funds are appropriated to CDT, and the state will develop the network directly. Whereas the CPUC funds are for last mile grants that are referenced earlier are allocated out to recipients as grants. The MMBI funds are spent directly by CDT to develop the middle mile network. As such, there's no application process. Input on the MMBI network was provided to CPUC through its robust public proceeding processes last fall, and can still be provided to the CDT at our regular virtual MMAC meetings that we encourage everyone who's interested in attending. Per SB 156, the CPUC. identified the unserved and underserved locations throughout the state, and CDT has worked with CPUC and Golden State Net, CDT's third-party administrator, to develop a 10,000-mile map that runs along the state highways throughout the state, connecting these unserved and underserved locations that were identified by CPUC. We have the added challenge, and I think on the slide here you can kind of see the green line there that makes up that 10,000-mile map. We have the added challenge, as I think has been noted, that the federal ARPA funding must be under contract by December of 2024. That's for all leases, all construction, everything, every component of it. And then the network must be completed by December 2026. So anyone who's tried to develop a project of this magnitude will understand just how tight a time frame that is. Given this time frame, CDT has worked with Caltrans and permitting agencies to streamline processes to bring average timeframes down from 30 months to the 10 or 11 months, I think is where we're at right now, which is going to definitely help them accelerate their pre-construction work and move us to construction sooner. Caltrans is also finalizing construction contract solicitations currently that should be going out in the weeks to come here. And CDT is finalizing solicitations for IRU leases of existing infrastructure, as well as joint build opportunities. So these efforts will help CDT optimize and really accelerate network deployment. Last November, CDT moved forward with 18 initial projects where CPUC had identified a need already based on public input. These are intended to help Caltrans start the learning process, I think as Gail Miller had noted, to really inform the development of the broader project, and as well as some of these pre-construction and permitting efforts that we've been able to streamline. And Caltrans has begun pre-construction work on all of these 18 segments now. In May, as noted, we announced the rest of the network, the full 10,000 miles, as noted here again in the green. And Caltrans has begun work on all of the remaining segments. That's again, that's a monumental lift on their side. They have, I think the legislature provided them with 300 positions in the this last 2022 Budget Act to facilitate getting all of this pre-construction work done and moving these on to construction. Once built, CDT will own and operate the MMBI network, and will be using a third-party administrator per SB 156 for that. If you want to move to the second slide, real briefly here, we have the next slide here kind of shows kind of maybe a little poor quality here, but you can kind of see that the 4 counties in the Redwood Coast region. There is a broad understanding that the Redwood Coast region includes some of the lowest broadband services in the state, and the 10,000-mile network includes 790 miles through these 4 counties. We also note that of the project 3 of the initial 18 that were mentioned is in the Lake County area, and that will eventually provide a middle mile backbone to serve communities that are estimated to include more than 6,000 currently unserved households. And again, Caltrans has begun pre-construction work on most of the segments identified statewide, and as well as here in these 4 counties. And the 2 construction and leasing solicitation efforts I referenced earlier will include all of these segments as well. So with that, I'll turn it back to Scott Adams.
Yeah, and Senator McGuire, I know that we'll get into this in the questions, but one of the things that we really wanted to share with folks is that there are a lot of moving parts on the Broadband for All program, and this is not just top down, but it's something that requires participation at the state level and the local and regional level. And we know that a lot of folks in this meeting and in your district are working on this. So want to make sure that we put a plug to folks to stay engaged and informed, to track progress of all of the programs that we had discussed at the Broadband Council meetings. The next meeting is on October 12th, the Middle Mile Advisory Committee meeting, which is on October 21st. Two, as you know, Ms. Miller mentioned, very much utilize those CPUC last mile programs that both existing and the ones that were called out and funded by SB 156, because those are part of the overall package where the middle mile and the last mile work together. A couple other things to note is that as we use additional federal funding to augment the Broadband for All aims, that CDT and PUC are going to be over the next year engaging in very extensive planning efforts around digital equity and broadband equity access and deployment planning. So we encourage all the folks on this call to engage and be a part of that process, because their feedback is really going to inform how additional federal dollars can be shaped to support both local and regional broadband efforts and those of tribal governments. And we want to make sure that folks know that we are committed to partnership and bi-directional feedback with all. And then lastly, we just note that we have created, as a requirement of the Broadband for All Action Plan, a Broadband for All portal, which is a relatively easy place for folks to go to get comprehensive information about all of the programs we have discussed, with direct connections to interactive maps on the middle mile that Mark had gone through, and link through and explanations of the CPUC's programs.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Adams, Mr. Monroe. Very, very grateful. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we're going to bring Gail Miller back in to the screen here, and we're going to be having a collaborative conversation here for the next about 15, 20 minutes to make sure that we are answering all of your questions. Any question that you want to know about how to secure funding, what are the priorities in regards to projects rolling out? How is the state working with tribal liaisons to ensure that tribal governments are receiving funding? Now is the time to have this conversation. Look, let's just be blunt. The North Coast has been on the wrong side of the digital divide for way too long. It's simply unacceptable. And these three individuals, Miller, Monroe, and Adams, are working to change that even as we speak. Miller, Monroe, and Adams are the three individuals who are overseeing the deployment of the 10,000 miles of middle mile high-speed internet, and will be working with local governments and tribal governments to be able to get that middle mile into neighborhoods, which is that separate pot of funds. So we're taking your questions, your comments here today, and just simply get it into the chat. Let's go to our first question. And we're gonna, if we can, unmute Ms. Miller, that would be great. Let's go to our first question. Is State Route 128 included in the middle mile? I am not positive about that, but Monroe, take it away.
Yes, it is. And so State Route 128 connects Highway State Route 1 to State Route 101. So yes, and as folks, one of the things I think I should do here is we have the MMBI website has a map of that, the map that I just showed there. It's an interactive map. It really will allow people. So as people have questions, I'm happy to jump around. I have not memorized all of the state highways that are in the network because it's a 10,000 mile network. But I, certainly I can, happy to kind of try to check it out real time here. But certainly for the 128, yes, that is included.
That's fantastic. So Scott Adams has put that Broadband for All link to the map into the chat right now. Feel free to click on that as we are having this discussion. So I'm going to go back to Monroe. So Mr. Monroe, talk about how middle mile projects are being prioritized. So the first 18 projects have already been identified. Mr. Monroe, you're going to be breaking ground on those first 18 projects when? Ballpark.
At least 3 of them before the end of the calendar year.
That's fantastic. And then the majority of the rest in calendar year 2023?
Yes, that's it. That's what's anticipated. Yes. When we put them together, we were, first of all, we were looking for learning opportunities on them. So we had to go through the process that was provided for in SB 156. So we really wanted the Public Utilities Commission to identify where we were, where we needed to be on these. What they're composed of, when you think of this project, a lot of standalone projects, right? And that is largely what this is going to be, to the extent that we're out there having Caltrans build they're going to go out there and just build this project. And I say that to distinguish from what we'll call dig smart opportunities. And I think a lot of people in the past have wondered, well, if Caltrans is in the process of doing transportation projects, why are they not adding fiber? And there are some constitutional limitations for how transportation funding can be used. And so that really requires a partnership. Because we've provided the funding here, those 18 projects also include some of those dig smart opportunities. So those are the ones you're going to see that are starting in the current calendar year and in 2023. And so we kind of bundled them to look at here's where the projects are, or that where we know there's a need, and of those there's some sections here where we'll be able to start earlier because there is
Perfect.
dig smart opportunities.
No, that's great. Mark Monroe, very grateful. Mr. Monroe, 30 seconds. We're going to go back to these questions in the chat. We're getting a lot of questions right now. If you have a question, feel free to drop them in the chat. Mr. Monroe, the question of the hour, when do we start seeing projects in Humboldt and Gail, Norte and Mendocino, right? Lake is there. Already, we're looking at 3 projects there. Mr. Monroe, I know you're evaluating, and let's just be honest. Mr. Monroe, Ms. Miller have been meeting with local government representatives, tribal representatives from the North Coast. When is the next round? Can't promise that it's going to be North Coast, but when's the next round of project announced?
So the way I would describe it is that the 10,000 mile map that we came out with in May is that next round. We want to obviously prioritize. We're moving forward on the full 10,000 miles. So Caltrans has started their pre-construction work on everything that we just saw there in these 4 counties. They are moving forward with that right now.
So on that, I'm just going to do a real quick lightning round with you, Mr. Monroe. So for example, if we're looking at Highway 299 or up 101 going towards Klamath, right? You anticipate that, how are those projects prioritized? Again, just generically, not focusing on one region or another, but how are you prioritizing projects to get them built?
Well, we're going out with the contract solicitations that we mentioned for that entire segment. So and we're going out with those right now. So our goal is to get those bids in the current calendar year for all of that, or for the majority of that, so that we can actually start rolling out with construction in 2023. That's our intent there. And that requires Caltrans to, by doing the construction contracts before we complete the pre-construction, that allows, as soon as we have segments ready, cleared through the permitting process, we can start construction. So we anticipate in 2023.
That's great. Mark Monroe, thank you so much. Let's go to questions and comments in the chat. Greg Foster. Hey, Greg, thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you for all your work. Greg says, thank you for your leadership. We've come a long way in 20 years when the state would charge exorbitant fees for access to highway rights of way for broadband projects. Look, I'm going to turn it over to Miller. Miller really busted chops of those incumbent carriers, right? And said, we can no longer do that. The state is open access. Miller, 30 seconds on what Mr. Foster just said.
Which in terms of
just said that, look, we're no longer charging those fees. It's open access. We want to be able to utilize.
I think that's completely right. And is Mr. Foster, I was reading oh no, that was Pat who talked about banking. I do want to acknowledge why banking is so important as well, in terms of how much you lose when you don't have internet, in terms of access to capital, and what happens to both households and small businesses. So yes, absolutely want to acknowledge that, Pat, earlier on. Yeah, I mean, I think that's totally right. So as I mentioned, with this current subsidy from the federal government, especially for low-income folks, there's kind of a limit. What California is trying to do is twofold. One, so we haven't yet mandated, we've mandated affordability, we haven't mandated amounts, but the idea is that there won't be any of the subsidies given for the last mile. So what happens when they're hard to build areas, the telecoms come in to the Public Utilities Commission and ask for this last mile funding. And what the PUC has now said is the only way to qualify for this last mile funding is if you have a commitment not only to affordability, but high speed access. So you can't charge $30 a month and have dial up, right? Like that doesn't work. It has to be a dual commitment to affordability and high-speed internet. And the PUC is saying that you don't qualify for the subsidies if you don't have a plan to offer $40 a month for that option for folks. So absolutely, I think that you will really begin to see over time, I don't think it'll be immediate, you will begin to see a huge decrease in the exorbitant fees. And then the question about access and right-of-ways, Greg, to your specific question about how we get that. So because this is all going to be open access, so but the state of California will determine what obviously in all the right-of-ways that Caltrans operates, you'll see a lot of building there. And so the fees will be limited because we went from a proprietary indefeasible right of use, what we call, that's the privilege to use all the cable that the telcos and cable have set. That will go from those cable companies and now be owned and operated by the state of California. So you're not going to be sort of screwed every time you go and try to get the next connectivity point, because hopefully if there is any opportunity, the state will have built there, or the state itself will hold the rights to these indefeasible rights of use. So when we use existing infrastructure, it'll be existing infrastructure with the same idea of open access. I hope that answers your question.
No, that's great.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you for it. I think it's a really great question. And then the other thing I'd encourage you is to really get involved with the loan loss reserve program and technical assistance, and really see if your communities yourselves can start building the communities and the JPAs that you need to ensure that you're responsible for your own access for your cities.
Thank you so much, Gail Miller, Department of Finance. Let's keep it going, y'all. We're going to go to James. Good morning, James. James asks, when do we expect the opportunities for contracting on these projects to go out for bid? Again, Mark, I'm going to come back to you. Let's just look at the 10,000 miles. A large number of these projects making up the 10,000 miles will go out to bid in 2023, correct?
Yeah, well, I'm going to say 2022 for the majority of it, and the rest in the first half of 2023. Yes, exactly. When we look at the 10,000 miles, based on our assessment so far of existing infrastructure, and I think this really heavily applies up the North Coast, certainly, is the idea that 6,000 miles of it does not have existing infrastructure. We have to build it. And so our goal is to go out for construction for approximately 60% of it in the current year, to sign construction contracts for it by the end of, by December or January at the latest of 2023. And then for it to go out by May of 2023 for the remaining construction contracts. And again, to the, I know there's a big labor concern. We're looking at doing a fewer number. One scenario, it could be 400 projects. We're looking at doing a couple dozen. And then there will be some larger contract with a lot of subcontractors and regional experts being able to participate through those.
That's great. Mark Monroe, thank you so much. Let's go to Josh. Good morning, Josh. Josh writes in and says, for last mile connectivity, are there any cities or municipalities that you know of that have already completed or are working on successful public-private partnerships for municipal broadband initiatives in California? Has anyone gone down this path before? So let's go to Miller. Ms. Miller, we're going to do 30 seconds just because we have quite a few questions. We're going to do lightning round with our panelists here. So we're going to ask our panelists to do 30-second responses. Can you talk about some of those model partnerships, public-private, Ms. Miller?
Yeah, Sonoma has one, San Francisco has one, and I would love to be able to talk more about how to do that better. And that's what I was talking about with the loan loss reserve program.
That's perfect. Just a little bit of a deep dive, Ms. Miller, on the loan loss reserve. It's essentially starting capital that a local government can use. And they could have their city internet either publicly owned or contract out with a private, correct, Ms. Miller?
Exactly.
That's perfect. We're going to go to our next question. Will there be a financial assistance program available for lending to intermediaries? We just heard that from Ms. Miller. How is the loan loss reserve going to be made available? Ms. Miller, let's talk about that. How do local cities apply for the loan loss reserve? We're going to unmute Ms. Miller. If we can, we'll also unmute Mr. Adams. We can unmute Ms. Miller and Mr. Adams, and we'll just ask Mr. Adams and Ms. Miller to stay off of mute. There we go.
Yep,
So
of course, sorry.
Away.
Yes, so the loan loss reserve, I will try and find the link to put it in the chat, is through the Public Utilities Commission, and they will start applications in the next in the next probably 2 months. So I will either find it or give it to Senator McGuire to send to the mayor and others. Thank you to the mayor, by the way, to make sure that you all have access to that information. It will be an application process through the Public Utilities Commission.
That's great. And then Miller, on the issue of the loan loss reserve, essentially starting capital for cities or counties, when will that become available?
Also in the next 2 months. So that's what I'm going to put in the chat, both.
That's perfect. So again, y'all, we are moving with speed, right? When the state of California says there's a fire underneath the tail, you better believe it. We're moving both with deadlines from the federal government and the need that exists currently in our communities. The mayor writes in, looking for tips. What's the best way to take broadband discussions to the general public? It's often technical. People lose sight of the link between broadband efforts and what it means to them personally. So do you have any good talking points? Ms. Miller, Mr. Monroe, Mr. Adams, let's talk about that for a second. So you're looking, once these projects are built and we're moving with speed on these middle mile projects, local cities should start focusing in on how they're going to connect, right? So you have any talking points on what's best for the community? And then just when it comes to connecting, how is that going to work? Ms. Miller, Mr. Monroe.
You know, I actually think RCRC, I put up the loan loss reserve, but I think what RCRC is doing is at goldenstateconnect.org, really, really worthwhile. Like, so that's going to be, so I would just say the talking points are connect with your communities. I think we no longer have to talk about how it's a problem. We all know it's a problem. I think what we have to do is acknowledge the frustration and that this should have been done 3 years ago. And really, but talk about, I think, why the future looks different. I think sort of sharing the trajectory of the project is helpful because there is a lot of forward movement. I think folks aren't used to seeing that for government. And I really think taking this leadership yourselves, I would, again, goldenstateconnect.org from the Rural Counties Community Association, super important to engage with those groups because they themselves are offering technical assistance and getting folks going. Sorry, more than 30 seconds, but really, really important to connect and engage within the community because acknowledge the frustration, but how it really is going to change and has to change by 2024.
100%. Thank you so much, Ms. Miller. Let's go to, I'm sorry, Mr. Adams, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I would just add also is that in terms of broadband, I mean, definitely Ms. Miller's spot on. But I do think at a more granular level, at a community level, that just reinforcing people understand how critical broadband is in this modern world. I mean, it's central to everything we do. Online education, healthcare, banking, 100% of job applications, require internet service, public safety, emergency response, and really pointing out how those inequities are gating factors to so many people experiencing, the social and economic benefits of broadband. So I think that, that is also a critical part of the conversation and really distinguishing between, in an era of ubiquitous cell phones, how a wired connection with a device to the home that is reliable is empowering for folks in those underserved and unserved areas to fully participate in this modern technological world.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adams. Very grateful. Thank you, Ms. Miller. Let's keep it going. Linda writes in, does the condition of the last chance grade, Highway 101 that connects Del Norte County with the rest of the state, do the conditions of last chance grade complicate the projects coming to Crescent City? So look, there is a pre-existing private system that heads from, that connects Crescent City, heads down towards Klamath. Long term, there may need to be some thought put into moving that system over to the more inland route that will be built by the state. But for the time being, and just being candid, there's a pre-existing system that is on the current right-of-way. Not complicate, but eventually, just being honest about it, we may need to move it off the coast and inland to the new route. But that is not going to stop the state working with local tribal governments and municipal governments to be able to get those more remote communities along the Klamath served. Mr. Monroe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that's the game plan for now.
Exactly. And just I want to highlight to everybody those timeframes. there will be room for improvements in the future, but we have those federal timeframes. And so exactly, we want to optimize and get service as soon as possible.
100%. Let's go to our next question. What programs are available to tribes to get digital access? So, Mr. Monroe, you've spent some considerable amount of time meeting with tribal leaders here on the North Coast, but throughout the state. They're absolutely eligible. And there are some specific tribal funds from the feds that tribes can also match with. Mr. Monroe, take it away on that.
Well, I think, yeah, so I mean, the key thing we tell everybody is be familiar with where you're going to connect to the middle mile. That's really key for a lot of the last mile funding, I think, is to be able to say, here's how this connects you back to everybody else. But I think Scott Adams has a really strong understanding of kind of that interaction with the tribal entities. We have been meeting with tribes. We continue to meet with them. Obviously, it's an enormous priority for the state and trying to be able to get out to them.
Yeah, I would just add, Senator McGuire, that I really want to go back to the work of the state in view and make sure that tribal entities are looking first at the PUC, the Tribal Technical Assistance Program that's been established. There's the local agency technical assistance program that has funding that tribal entities are also available for, and then those last mile grant programs. In addition to that, there's the Treasury Capital Project Fund. There are separate tribal allocations. And then through the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, there's the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, which is part of the IIJA that NOFO hasn't come out, but there's going to be an additional $2 billion for tribal entities in that pool of funding. And then just note that our commitment to engagement, we're working with both the NTIA, the PUC, and other state folks to do at least quarterly engagements with tribal entities to make sure that we're coordinating all of these and providing technical assistance where needed and where we're asked to help do so.
Thank you so much, Mr. Scott Adams. Appreciate that. We have time for just a few more questions. We are so grateful that you've tuned in today and so excited to be talking about America's largest public broadband initiative. Moving forward here in the Golden State, coming to a community near you, we couldn't be more thrilled, and obviously a focus on underserved and unserved communities. So Mr. Monroe, Mr. Adams, let's get into that. How is the state deciding unserved, underserved, who gets service first? That was a big conversation leading into the securing of the over $6 billion, now approaching $7 billion. How is that going to work as we move forward?
Yeah, so I'll start with SB 156 was really clear about having the Public Utilities Commission. You know, they have the ongoing relationships with the telecommunications companies. And we went through a robust statewide public proceeding where they took in input. They produced a map this last year. There was a draft in December, but I think in February timeframe it was finalized, and that really identified where those unserved and underserved locations were. And so our network is intended to connect all of those. So I think that's where those are our targets, if you will. That's where we're trying to take the state highway system and any existing infrastructure that we have access to and get to those targets that were identified by the Public Utilities Commission.
Mr. Monroe and Ms. Miller, please comment on this. There are some smaller regional internet service providers. There's one like in Trinity County, for example. How will the state work with those regional providers and empower them to serve and expand communities? Ms. Miller, Mr. Monroe.
Yeah, I think this is what we keep going back to. So really will be, the state is providing the money and some of the technical assistance resources, but that's where I would keep going to RCRC and others to really see if you can build these JPAs yourself, as I think the North Coast has been successful with. But there's two, and I put it in the chat, two resources from the state, the technical assistance and the the loan loss reserve program for that startup capital, but the infrastructure will come from working within the communities and RCRC. And then I just wanted to add to Mr. Foster's comment in the chat that we are doing dig ones, and Dr. Wood has worked a lot on that in your district. We are absolutely engaging in that. I think you will continue to see some movement in that as well. And so when Mark and Scott talk about sort of the underserved and unserved, that's 100% correct. And at the same time, we're making sure that we're building smartly where we can get these economies of scale. So if there's another project, why not put conduit fiber in, right? So there you'll start to see a lot more of that as well. But to your basic question, what the state is doing, the state is providing technical resources, very technical assistance once you have these coalitions together or a JPA together, and the essentially a startup capital for your communities. But it's up to the community.
Yeah, and so Ms. Miller, it would be smart, for example, in unincorporated communities, whether you live in northern Mendocino or in Lake County, start those conversations with the Board of Supervisors and city councils. And then, Ms. Miller, I don't want to put words in your mouth, then that JPA or small group would then apply for the last mile funds at the Public Utilities Commission, for example.
Exactly. Well, the last mile funds and the loan loss reserve. So you would do loan loss reserve first. That would be your startup capital. So get technical assistance once you have your group together. Exactly. Board of Supervisors, community organizations, exactly what you're doing today. Technical assistance, then go get the loan loss reserve funding. And then if you still need it, which you may not with that loan loss reserve funding, then apply for last mile funding. But I would definitely, in terms of the JPA, get it together like as soon as possible so you're ready to go.
And that technical assistance can cover like the engineering study, any environmental issues, right? All the soft costs associated with the build out of a project, Ms. Miller?
Yep, exactly.
That's great. I want to go to our second to last question here. Do you have any information on plans for access for communities along Highway 299? So Highway 299 connects Humboldt to Trinity County, which then ends up over in Redding. Mr. Monroe, Mr. Adams, I want to go to you, Highway 299. I know that there's been, Humboldt State has had some focus on Highway 299. We want to do a shout out to Connie Stewart for all of her work on the 299 project. And Ms. Miller also mentioned Sim Wood. He has been incredible leader on the Dig Ones policy. You're absolutely right, Ms. Miller. But Mr. Monroe, Highway 299.
Yeah, so looking at our map on our website here, we 299 goes from from all the way up to the coast, Highway 1, all the way through into Modoc. So our route follows 299 all the way along that.
That's fantastic. I want to go to some closing comments from each of our panelists, and then we're going to turn it back over to Mayor Seaman from the city of Eureka, and we are grateful for her leadership. Parting advice from each of you. I think we've heard that from Ms. Miller. Organize now and get those applications into the Public Utilities Commission. But we're going to go to 30-second closing comments. We're going to start where we ended. So why don't we start with Mr. Monroe, then we're going to go to Mr. Adams, and then we're going to go to Ms. Miller. Mr. Monroe, 30 seconds closing comments, please.
Yeah, I would just say, engage early. The Public Utilities Commission, the funding they're allocating is largely in the same federal time frame as ours. So, we tend to think of you build here, you build here, you build here, and then you build here. At this time, it's a network, and the fact that the state has a system is going to help you in applying for those last mile funding. So I would not wait. I would look at all of the processes. We're all in a very tight time frame, and that's also going to get the benefits to you sooner. But that would be my advice.
Thank you so much. That's Mr. Monroe, one of the three who are charged with building out America's largest broadband network. Mr. Monroe, thank you for your incredible work and your dedication to get this done. Let's turn it over to Scott Adams for closing comments, please.
Thank you, Senator. I would just say that we're at this incredible moment in time where federal, state, and local leadership, policy, and funding is aligned to close the digital divide. And, thanks, largely to your leadership in the legislature and then the governor, we've got the resources and the framework in place to get this done, but it's going to require, strong partnership, engagement, and alignment between the federal, the state, and local partners. So what I just encourage everyone to engage, take advantage of the programs that are together. And much like the Middle Mile, let's not think of things in sequence, let's do things concurrently. So as the Middle Mile built, let's develop last mile solutions that'll be prepared to connect when it's lit up. And then in the process, let's all work together on getting folks connected, increasing broadband adoption rates where there already is internet and there are cost barriers and, skills challenges. So that's it for me, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Scott Adams. Closing comments there. Let's turn it over to Ms. Miller.
I think you said it best, Senator. Organize now. We have disrupted the industry, and you should disrupt your communities. Build your JPAs, whatever that takes. I would start with your board of supervisors and then move on to whatever group within your locals that you can, and really, really know that money is not the problem for perhaps the first time ever. It is a question of organizing and getting the applications in, and we are all a resource. So please contact Senator McGuire. I think all three of us are happy to talk to you and really make sure that you have the assistance you need to build the resources in your own communities.
No, thank you so much, Ms. Miller. And I'll just be candid, right? When there have been questions that have come up from local governments or tribal governments, the three of these individuals have made themselves available, not once, not twice, not three times, but multiple times, really trying to work through some of the technical challenges that are unique to our region. So we absolutely encourage you, and we will work with anyone and everyone to start organizing now. Cities, counties, tribal governments, to be able to come up with a last mile strategy and how to plug into that middle mile network. So Pat says, how do we get unincorporated areas of Humboldt access? Yes, it's going to be the Board of Supervisors, but I also believe it's going to be the County Economic Development Department helping lead it, right? So I think we need to identify a lead agency within the county that could then help organize, or a nonprofit to help organize the formation of a JPA to be able to get a last mile network up and running. And I think it should absolutely include both local and tribal governments. And we look forward to working with you on that. And I will say, we were just meeting with the Southern Humboldt School District here on Monday, and there is a potential last mile project that they're looking at right now that's would be coming through the school district. Right. There's something exciting on that. All right, so we're going to turn it back over to the mayor, Susan Seaman. Ms. Miller, did you want to chime in?
No, sorry, all good. Thank you.
No, thank you. If we could give a virtual round of applause to Gail Miller, to Mark Monroe, to Scott Adams. Thank you so much for your leadership. Again, no longer are we going to be saying that we're on the wrong side of the damn digital divide. We're going to be connecting the North Coast and our communities. Monroe, Miller, Adams, thank you for your leadership. And Mayor Seaman, we love you. Thank you so much for allowing us to join you and to be able to have this critical conversation about connectivity here in Northern California.
I'm so glad for everything, all the great information you brought this morning, and always a pleasure to see you.